I am super, super excited about the next panel because we have two incredible women who are going to be talking about vaccinations and global breakthroughs. So if we just give them a massive round of applause as we welcome Dr. Raine and Nicola Blackwood. Awesome. Over to you.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, and I could not be more excited to be here today. Firstly, I'm here in front of an in-person audience, and I can't tell you what a joy and pleasure that is today, but also I am with the extraordinary Dr. Raine, Chief Executive of the MHRA. She really needs very little introduction, and I am Nicola Blackwood, the Chair of Genomics England, and we are going to talk today about vaccines and how to create environments for global breakthroughs. I can't think of anybody to be talking about this more appropriately with than June. Now, June, you have trained in medicine and in pharmacology at Oxford. Can you tell me if anything in that training actually prepared you for taking on the leadership at the MHRA just in time for Brexit and then for a pandemic?
Well, Nicola, what can I say? On the face of it, very little indeed prepared me for taking on the MHRA just as we were completing our transition from the EU and about to go into lockdown from a pandemic. But actually, if you dig a little bit deeper and think about it, what an Oxford education I was privileged to have gives you is a real feel for the importance of robust scientific evidence. That's the best way to make decisions. And I guess if you work in the NHS, as I did, you also have that strong feeling about people who are on the receiving end of your decisions. If you've ever worked in a casualty, you know what it's like to make decisions at pace because lives can depend on it. I think back to one time when I was in casualty, an entire boatload of holidaymakers came in with carbon monoxide poisoning, for heaven's sake, and it blocked casualty, it blocked intensive care, and there were lives lost. So you never quite lose that sense that something really must be done quickly.
And also, I suppose, that sense of responsibility. Now, you were in the hot seat, of course, when decisions about vaccines had to be made. Some of those were conventional vaccines, but some of them were novel vaccines. I'm thinking particularly about mRNA vaccine. MHRA was famously the first regulator in the world to approve an mRNA vaccine for human use when it approved the Pfizer vaccine. Well, I suppose my question to you is, how did you make that decision? How did you come to that decision so early and have the confidence to do so?
In a sense, it was building on a number of factors. I've already mentioned the importance of science, and my goodness, we have the most vibrant, brilliant life science industry in this country, and the data came through and we'd adapted to look at it as it became available. I think the second factor, a strong regulatory track record in biologics, in vaccines that we could draw on. And then I think probably we talk about the ecosystem. We guard our independence as a regulator very, very jealously, but we do talk a lot, and we talk with industry, we talk with academia, the colleagues in Oxford who were doing their research out there in the Jenner Institute. And so there were lots of connections. I remember hearing about an mRNA vaccine and the question, how do you manufacture it? And that was from the British industry. So those things came together, and I guess what you would say was we had prepared minds. When we heard about SARS-CoV-2, we knew a lot about coronavirus. So as old Pasteur would say, chance favours the prepared mind, and we were prepared.
But I mean, most of us don't know the process that you go through for approving a vaccine, but particularly not for evidence gathering of a novel vaccine. And the ability to make that decision so quickly made a lot of people feel like, maybe this was not a safe thing to be doing. Can you take all of us through the journey of how you made that decision so that you were confident in the safety? Answer some of those questions about the safety and the security and the rigorousness of the process.
It starts really very early on with the laboratory studies, with the animal models, and really rigorous standards of testing. Expecting the unexpected, you look and look again, and it's only when you've carried out those early studies, phase 1, that you can actually start to think about moving forward with clinical trials. We adopted a way of working that was constant dialogue and partnership with the developers, all of them, and that meant that they were signposted to where to look, what we were looking for. So we were absolutely rigorous, even though we were doing it all in the shortest possible time. So I'd say to anyone who has any questions, we didn't cut any corners, not at all.
So my understanding is that for the Pfizer vaccine, although it was approved in December, you had been conducting rolling reviews on the data from as early as December. Is that a usual process for regulators? Were you doing something that was different that allowed the MHRA to be more agile, to go faster?
What was different was that we did prioritise this work. Usually a regulator's very rigorous about who comes first and taking each as it comes. So it was important that we made this our priority and shifted our best clinical and scientific expertise there. But yes, as you say, we started early. It was a continuous process and it was iterative. So we constantly knew what we were expecting and when, and not a day was wasted. Our teams were working 24/7. And I would actually acknowledge the role our experts play. We have an extensive outplaced academic list of experts, and they bring an awful lot of independent thinking, and they were working as fast as we were.
So in a pandemic, it's relatively easy to prioritize because everybody's pointing in the same direction. Everybody understands where the risk and the benefit lies, and you can make sure that you get through the right vaccines, because you know which ones you need to prioritize through the system. In peacetime, what you prioritize is more of a challenge. Working 24/7 is more of a challenge. Capacity is more of a challenge. So how do you take this question of pace from now into the post-Brexit, post-pandemic period, and make sure that we maintain the good parts of what has happened during this period?
Well, it's a question that we're thinking about all the time. And I'd like to say all regulators are, how we build on the agility and the flexibility and make that a new way of working, because everyone benefits. I think there is a certain amount we can do within our present resource. Some may take a little bit more, and some may take amending regulatory frameworks. And luckily, because our parliamentarians have worked so hard on it, we have a Medicines and Medical Devices Act now that we can look again at what risk proportionate regulation is. Clinical trials, for example, we can make sure that we're doing things that add value and not just to meet checkbox lists of questions that we have done in the past. Everything needs to add that value. So yes, we'll in peacetime do things very differently, I think.
And I mean, you're all too familiar with how difficult it is to manage the challenge, but data which is uncertain was one of these questions which came up. So obviously with Pfizer, you were looking at the data from as early as October, and some of that was incomplete, and in the end you had to make a decision still with a degree of uncertainty. How do you make those decisions when data is uncertain, but where the benefit of making that decision is clear?
It's the biggest challenge for a regulator, and we're acutely aware that we can build more data, we can look for more studies, but there comes a point where the benefit risk becomes clear. Fortunately, with these vaccines, they work extremely well, and we did have large studies to look at. And we take a decision that's really in the context of the risk that we're in, because as I said, every day matters. So it's a conscious decision. A lot of people have said, was it a very risky decision? Actually, we were very sure that the benefit risk was favourable. And I like to think that's because of the real scientific expertise we brought to it.
But there will be quite a few people who think, hang on a second, uncertain data, risk, I'm a bit uncomfortable about that. So how do you make those decisions in the context of uncertainty still, even when you're at the final stage and you think now's the time, we're going to make the decision, we have enough data, but you have that degree of uncertainty? How do you communicate the decision in the context of uncertainty and risk and still ensure that patients feel confident in that decision and in taking the vaccine or whatever drug it may be, and that clinicians feel confident in delivering the product, whatever it may be?
Really important to be very clear about what we do know and where there are gaps and how we're going to fill them. And that's really the kind of thrust that we bring to this. What do we know that we can be confident on? We all know we were expecting effectiveness levels of about 50%, and they were coming through at 80%, 90%. So that was pretty rock solid. We had worked a lot on the manufacturing side, how well the products could be made and successfully delivered. And then there were one or two things that we were waiting for. Colleagues may remember there was a bit of animal work that was outstanding. But when you know enough what you're going to do to close the gaps, fill the gaps where you're uncertain, then that's the moment to say yes.
And how did it feel when later on in the process, after the approvals had happened, side effects that had not earlier been evident came out and you had to deal with that anxiety and public perception of additional risk without undermining the vaccine rollout?
Yeah. We've always maintained and communicated that no medicine or vaccine is without a risk. So we have to expect the unexpected. And it's only when millions of people are receiving a vaccine that you start to pick up the very rare signals. Proactive vigilance means having multiple sources of evidence, not just the yellow cards that loads of people, 250,000 people have been filling in yellow cards. That's great, but we have studies underway. We have something called a vaccine monitor. Colleagues may have had a letter saying, will you join? Because you might be one of the groups, immunosuppression, for example, where we want to learn more. So we have a real program of work to start consolidating that safety profile. And then when a signal comes up, to be very open and very clear about what we've found.
And just to give everyone a sense of how that data is analysed and assessed, just sort of explain, what is the process? Who looks at it? What is the rigor that goes into assessing those risks when a risk occurs that is unexpected?
Yeah. Confidence, I hope, will come from the fact 8:30 this morning, I was going over the latest yellow cards with the team. Twice a day, 8:30, 4 o'clock, we have teams of clinicians, scientists, statisticians who are looking at what the public have told us. And that really is the only way to keep on top of what is emerging. Every Thursday we publish, tomorrow we'll be publishing the latest with that interpretation that's vital. There's no other way to do it, is to keep the minds on the job that we're doing. There's always something to learn. Plus, we relate to our international partners, the US FDA, the EMA, and we're constantly reviewing what is coming out. Because we were the first, of course, we've got to look at our data set as the best and the most extensive. And so to always be ready to pounce on what might be a new finding.
And I want to come at this question of the quality of data from a different angle now. So if you are an innovator or a drug developer and you are at an early stage of developing your product and you're trying to make sure that you do that in an optimal way, so that you can drive out the uncertainty as much as possible, but you have to be realistic about it. What is your recommendation to those individuals, the innovators, the companies, as to how they can make sure that they develop their either testing or their trials to make sure that they do this definitely in the safest and most effective way, but also in the way that works best for you as a regulator?
We value and we'd always encourage early engagement, right at the very earliest. Now, I have heard that sometimes people slightly like to put off speaking to a regulator.
No, never.
Better not to know. But we've got an innovation office. Advice is free, totally confidential, that will signpost to the options for next steps. And if that's what is wanted or needed, formal scientific advice where we do commit to study design, methodologies, statistical analyses. Then we have a new innovative licensing pathway where a bespoke target development profile can be developed. So we see early engagement, never waste the opportunity, get to the right data in the shortest possible time. And that's what is a true dialogue. It's not imparting information, it's an absolute interplay of the developer and the regulator. And that way you get to success. So engage early, every time, confidential and free.
And this is most important when the more novel the innovation, the earlier, really, because sometimes the regulatory pathways have to be thought through. And so that engagement theory, I assume, is even more important in the really novel areas.
Totally. Something truly novel where we need to get different minds, pull in experts. It's even more important. And what I would say too, this isn't just for the large pharma, small and medium enterprises, brilliant people in the NHS, academia. This isn't a one-stop shop only for one-size-fits-all advice. It's actually dedicated and bespoke to the person who's developing. So I'd really, if there's one message today, it's engage early. Come to us and we will help guide you through.
And one of the things which I was excited to see was starting to happen during the pandemic was the simultaneous regulatory and ethics advice and the bringing together of those two strands. Now, I think that there will be many people here and many people in our virtual audience, as well as elsewhere, who think that ethics and thinking about impact should be designed in to technologies and products as early as possible. Is that the thinking behind some of this?
We've worked with the Health Research Authority just on the principle you've described, Nicola, because it should be possible to have that early and really comprehensive look. What we would ideally like is the same package of data that starts to satisfy the various different decision-making bodies. MHRA is our next, if you like, partner. We're working on having a three-way advice: regulator, Health Research Authority and the National Institute for Health Research, because the earlier we get that kickstart with everyone round the table, the better the development pathway and the least complexity and, iterative approaches. There's been a lot of discussion about having one door into the system and a lot of thought about that, particularly with the Accelerated Access Collaborative. But what I think we're thinking now is it's more multiple doors in, but then everyone coming together, a bit like the Brands Hatch, one doing the tars and the other making sure the steering's okay. It really needs to be a pit stop approach, whereas everyone coming in gets the whole thing moving.
Well, you've heard it here. We'll bring her back next year, and if the pit stop approach isn't
Brands
there,
Hatch next
then,
year.
Okay, exactly.
Who I'm looking at Lewis Hamilton.
We've talked about a lot of these elements, but what was extraordinary during the pandemic was the scale and pace of the clinical trials that were stood up so quickly and really so effectively. I mean, we had global impact with the REACT trial, with the recovery trial, obviously with the vaccines. So the question that I have for you is, how are we going to capture those different elements which enabled that to happen for the post-pandemic period? We already said it's quite hard to do that in peacetime because of the prioritization and the focus and the working 24/7. But we can't lose that, because the benefit for NHS patients, but just for everybody's health, is so important.
I have to say, the ecosystem here, if we're calling it that, with the NHS, industry, academia, government, regulator, is fantastic. But what was really stunning was the public's response when there was a call for volunteers for the vaccine trials. Was it 400,000, 500,000 now?
Yeah.
40,000 in recovery. And we see what that delivers. When I talk to the FDA, and in past years it's been what's happening in the US, now we get approached by the FDA, what's happening in recovery? And it tells you what this country is able to produce. We must capture that. I think at G7, a charter has been adopted last week that looks at the elements of the clinical trials system that we really need to build on. And one of those clearly is the regulatory arm, and that's on my to-do list. But if we can capture what it was that made this country so special, and in fact, even today, I think it's a year to the day that dexamethasone went into standard clinical care after recovery, showed the mortality reduction. And today we've got the monoclonal antibodies. So, what's not to like? It's a fantastic system.
One of the things I think is the Find Recruit platform. And this will enable individual trials to find those who will be ideal participants for the trial more effectively and swiftly, and recruit them onto the trial, which has always been one of the big holdups on trials. Do you have an update for the progress with that? Do you know if that will be delivered soon?
The recruitment initiative I'm most familiar with is the Clinical Practice Research Data Link Sprint, which is their way of looking in a very extensive, it's 25% of the population who would be trial eligible. So that's the one I'm most familiar with, and that really is kicking off. Our ambition, of course, is to have an even bigger capture of the UK population. But all of these initiatives are key to making sure that recruitment is rapid. We do our part with rapid approval of the protocol, and then the results will come through and be actionable. So it's a great system.
I think it's quite easy to look at what happened with vaccines during the pandemic and think it all kicked off in March 2020. And of course, the investment in vaccine research in the UK goes back decades. UKRI and the other funders were investing in the Jenner Institute for many, many years. And so the messages about having long-term strategic investment in the areas that will yield the most important scientific innovation, and making sure that it's there for you when you most need it. So what do you think is important for us to make sure that we maintain that really important science base, but also drive it through the pipeline into innovation and product?
It really is going to be the key priority. The Office of Life Sciences is driving in that direction. And I think nobody's dismissing the fact that funding does need to be there. The work that Patrick Vallance, the government's chief scientific advisor, has done in preparation for G7, the pandemic preparedness partnership, had a really important piece of work around making sure that funding is in place. There's no point waiting till a pandemic comes and then trying to piece things together. There needs to be that body of suitable funding. So while there's not a lot that my agency can do about that, but we really are giving we're cheering from the margins as people like Minouche Shafiq and others come to the piece. CEPI is another one, the Gates Foundation, but government too. Really important.
You've mentioned a lot of global players there. I mean, it's quite clear, given where we are right now with an extension of lockdown because of a variant. If we didn't have genomic screening, which we in the UK contribute to disproportionately, we wouldn't be able to protect ourselves and make decisions. But it's no good having domestic surveillance. You need to have global surveillance. You need to have global collaboration. This is, pandemic preparedness is a global business. Life sciences, vaccines, all of this is a global business. So how are we going to take forward global collaboration on pandemic preparedness, but also the work that you are preparing as the new leader of the MHRA?
It's going to be, as you say, Nicola, quite rightly, an international charge. And I think, again, going back to G7 just last week, what the Prime Minister drove through was that agreement with Tedros from the WHO uppermost to look at developing a radar system that will pick up emerging threats, viral illnesses, or even the variants of the coronavirus at the very earliest stage, so that everyone can march to that tune. And I think it's got to be done at international level. For a regulator like ours, the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, strangely enough, when the UK led it, delivered a paper in 2019 on how to manage a crisis. So we did have that, but I think it needs revisiting in that global context, because WHO needs to step up now and really deliver that radar that we all need.
And do you have, confidence that the discoveries that have come out of this period, some of which have been extraordinary? I mean, mRNA has life-changing potential, not just in the field of vaccines, but in the wider field of therapeutics. Infectious diseases like malaria, cancer. For the first time, cancer, all have the potential to really be gripped. Do you have confidence that with the new agility, which was demonstrated by your agency, but also by the wider life science industry, the Vaccines Task Force was extraordinary in its risk-taking. Do you think that we can maintain that sense of confidence and ability to just move and invest at scale we will keep doing that in the post-pandemic period?
Do I think we can do it? I think we must do it. I think the vaccine task force needs, bottling, and that we can all emulate that spread of expertise that came together to look at different solutions. I think not just venture capitalists, but I think there was an army bomb disposal expert, people from all sorts of angles, but with a single and really overarching goal. And I think if we can look at, say, the opportunity for mRNA vaccines in that way. I was having a meeting just last week about the challenge of dementia. There are other pandemics, as you quite rightly say, cancer, heart disease, and use that innovative approach to start looking for solutions, developing pipelines, making rapid decisions. And it couldn't be more exciting. I think Office of Life Sciences, bring it on. The Life Sciences vision really will be the umbrella for so much of this. And as a regulator, we want to play our part.
So you think maybe we will be seeing an mRNA vaccines moonshot on our horizon?
Well, whether we call it a moonshot or an incubator or what do we call them, a sandbox, it could be whatever it takes to capture that breadth of input, think creatively, and lift to a new level of decision making. There's a lot that's happened. For example, we've got about 15 arm's length bodies, haven't we? That becomes fragmented. But together, that's the message of the pandemic. When you bring people together and you start to look at a common goal, then that's what I guess a moonshot is.